Hello and welcome to the January 2024 edition of the Marine Technology Society's Marine Mineral Resources webinar series. Today's speaker is Phillip Gales, a serial deep tech entrepreneur, and I'm your moderator for today, Alex Barnard. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items and introduction. During the webinar, please submit questions in writing via the question box on your screen, and questions are answered in the Q&A session after the talk. If you have questions about the webinar series, would like to propose a speaker, or just want to stay up to date with future webinars, follow the Marine Technology Society and the Marine Mineral Resources Committee on LinkedIn. I would like to take a moment here to thank the Marine Technology Society for supporting the development of this community space. Marine Technology Society membership comes with many benefits, such as access to professional committees, webinar recordings, the MTS journal, and career resources. So check it out. Today's speaker is Phillip Gales. Phillip is a serial deep tech entrepreneur who's built and scaled multiple companies in various heavy industries, including oil and gas, data analytics, cold supply chain, and logistics. He started his career working offshore on deep water drill ships and is now back offshore working in the deep sea mining industry. He runs a deep sea mining industry group which provides strategy and operations consulting to operators and investors. Phillip is a Y Combinator alumni, has an MBA from Harvard Business School, and a Master's of Engineering from the University of Cambridge. Phillip, many thanks for joining us here today.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here, Alex. Thank you very much. And good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining us here. This evening, I'm going to be talking about monsters, myths, and facts about deep sea mining, and particularly from my background as an entrepreneur and from an investor perspective. Unfortunately, my second slide has been messed up slightly by Alex because I was about to say everything that Alex has just said. You know, why am I here? What is my background? And why, frankly, respectfully, has someone that's only been in this industry for 9 months talking? And I wanted to start with that and start with the context of this. Because as Alex said, I'm a deep tech entrepreneur. I've worked in a lot of different industries. I've raised a lot of money, and I come with this background of working in the offshore industry from Shell and Schlumberger. And about 9 months ago, I saw a picture of the hidden gem in an article online. And I went, wow, I think I've served on that drill ship. I think I worked on it. And I started reading, and the industry just fascinated me. I said, well, I need to learn as much as possible about this industry and about what is going on. And so thankfully, I have a classmate from business school that had worked in this industry and published an excellent white paper in it. And I've spent the last 9 months trying to understand the industry, what is happening, how it is developing. And during that time, I've also been documenting it on a website at Deep Sea Mine AC. And the more I learned, the more I met with people, and the more I documented, the more I found people were reaching out to me, the more I was uncovering. And this really led to Alex approaching me last year and saying, hey, Phillip, you've got this really interesting resource. Why don't you talk to people about what you're doing and why? And that really is why I'm here. And so what I'm going to talk about this evening is a little bit of my background, twice now with Alex, and about the concept that the deep sea mining industry is evolving rapidly and that there is a difficulty for anyone wanting to come in because the information and analysis is really quite limited or inaccessible if you are not inside this industry. And what I see and what I've heard from a lot of finance professionals is that this causes a lot of myths and problems and misinformation when it comes to investing, when it comes to public perception, when it comes to how the industry talks about that, and they have some massive, wide-ranging repercussions. So we'll talk about that. I can't leave there empty-handed. I need to provide something. So I also want to talk about some of the answers I'm finding, particularly from that finance business perspective. And I'm going to leave you with a suggestion or a proposal or a thought. And I would really appreciate your input, your feedback, any ideas that you have as to how we can evolve this industry. So let's roll this all back. Sorry, my apologies. This will take about 30 minutes. We'll probably have about 20 minutes worth of questions. Please, as Alex said, put them in the chat. And then it is my father-in-law's 70th birthday today. We're going out to a restaurant, so I have to keep it all on time, both for your time and my own. So we'll be finishing just around the hour. So let's roll back about 9 months. And I had so many questions about deep sea mining. And coming from the oil and gas industry, of course, the first thing I thought is, well, where's the primary oil well drilling? And for those of you that aren't in the oil and gas industry, every single time you join an oil and gas company, and in fact, I've got about 3 or 4 of these floating around, you get this seminal work, which is about 200 pages long, and it just goes through everything you kind of need to know from a pretty high level about oil and gas. Like, where does oil form? Where is it found? How do you drill for it? Who does the drilling? How do you manage a reservoir? All this information so distinctly or succinctly distilled down into this 200-page book. And of course, that doesn't quite exist in the deep sea mining industry. And so I sort of hit a bit of a roadblock or a wall with that. I said, well, this makes sense. Thankfully, my classmate was able to point me in the direction of a lot of different people, a lot of different experts, and a lot of different papers. But what I noticed as I started digging in and trying to answer the questions that I had, and we'll talk about those in a moment, is that really the information seemed to fall into these slightly frustrating two different camps. That on the one hand, you have excellent books like Rahul Sharma's 3 books on deep sea mining, 600 plus pages long, extremely informative but very deep, technical. The first one is free, which is amazing, but is quite inaccessible because of the technical understanding that's required. There's been a lot of papers written about it. There's a lot of journal articles. I'm very indebted to James Hine at the USGS, who sent me a lot of papers and helped me with a lot of information, but they're mostly inaccessible because they are behind paywalls and they're very technical, they're difficult to understand. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have really quite light articles that talk on a very, very broad basis in the BBC or The Guardian or on NGOs' websites, and they're super accessible. They're very easy. They're very easy to find. They're shoved in your face. They're very easy to understand. But they left me feeling as if I didn't really understand this industry and I didn't understand where I might fit in. Because between the two of these, there's this real lack of accessible, understandable, third-party technical information that helps you understand the industry and what it might be and how it might develop. And what I mean by that is there is no McKinsey white paper on what deep sea mining is and how it might develop. There is nothing that answers the fundamental finance and business questions that you'd want to answer before you dedicate time to this industry or before you try and invest money in it or before you have a thesis around it. And I tried to solve this by diving into these papers. This is my desk from a few months ago. What you can't see in my office is that I have a hand-drawn map of the Pacific with great circle routes between various locations, trying to understand what's going on. I suspect I'm one of the few people that's actually read the exploration licenses being submitted for the Cook Islands. Quite a few spelling mistakes in some of those. I've read a ton of these articles, and what I've tried to do is to document them in a way that is accessible to people that are in business and finance, that will help them understand what this industry is, what it can be, where it might evolve to, but is more than just a little lightweight article, but is much less than a 350-page exploration license. And the questions that I was trying to answer are the questions that I've also heard from people in private equity and venture capital, in funds that are intrigued by this, and people, professionals in finance, but also, honestly, members of various government bodies. It's really quite simple questions. Things like where will and is deep sea mining happening? And who is doing that? And what exactly are they doing? And then the slightly more complicated of, well, why do they do that? Why is the industry structured in this way? And given it's structured in this way, how might it change? How will it evolve? What are the risks? And what are the opportunities here? If you want to dedicate 5 to 10 years of your career to what seems like an amazing industry, or you are a rich individual and you want to invest $1 or $5 or $10 million in a deep sea mining company, or you are a fund that is excited by this space, these are the questions that need to be answered. And with great respect to the industry for a number of reasons, and we'll talk about them, they are not really being answered. As I said, the reasons I believe they're not being answered, and we'll expand upon these, are that this is a relatively new evolving industry, but it's also an industry in which there is a lot of pushback, there is a lot of misinformation, there are a lot of repercussions for talking about it. And we'll dive into that. But what I started to notice when I talked to people in finance is that there's a really tricky issue here. And that's that if you want to invest in this industry, if you are a partner at a private equity fund, and for example, you have read about deep sea mining, you think that there might be an opportunity here, and you say, whoa, let's not miss the boat on this one. You might go, you might talk to an associate, you might talk to an analyst, you might say, hey, take a look at this industry. I want to know what's going on. I want to know if we're missing something. That analyst and that associate are going to go away and they're going to do exactly what I've done over the past 9 months. And they're going to hit exactly the same roadblocks, but they are probably not going to have a friend from business school that can make an amazing array of intros. And they're probably not going to have 9 months. They're going to have 9 days. And they're going to end up past midnight on a Thursday or a Friday night going, what the hell is going on in this industry? Can't understand EEZ versus CCZ versus ISA versus nodules, sulfides, critical metals. Which ones are they? Are there rare earths in there? I don't know, but what I do know and what I do hear is that there's a lot of controversy, and the controversy is right in my face, and that concerns me. And what ends up happening, and what I've heard from a finance professional, a number of professionals, is it becomes incredibly difficult to build a thesis because you can't get past the controversy and dig into what is actually happening. And the result is that money is not flowing in when it could, should, potentially must be flowing in. And this is a problem that I am trying to solve with deepseamining.ac. Can we summarize the information in a way that is not so overly scientific that it's incomprehensible, but is not so simplistic that it misses some of the major debates and discussions that need to occur if this industry is going to go ahead? And that's why I'm here. So let's talk a little bit about why this might be happening. I'm indebted to a lot of time that's been spent with a couple of people recently. I can't say whom, but thank you so much for your time, because I think there's a very, very good reason that this nascent young industry does not look like some of the other nascent young industries I've worked in previously in tech. And I think part of it is the monsters that are in the title. That as humans, we understand that the deep sea is alien and terrifying and inhospitable, and we cannot survive there. We will be crushed, we will be, it is freezing cold, we are unable to exist there, and frankly, a lot of the animals that live there look like monsters. And Hollywood has played on these fears. This is a deep, visceral fear of the unknown. There's a whole wonderful genre of B-movies that talk about or have protagonists who are literally deep sea mining or deep sea drilling, and some catastrophe happens. And it really speaks to that visceral fear, but also the fact that the deep sea is utterly inaccessible to most of the regular public. It's extremely difficult to get to, even for scientists in many ways, and that's simply because the deep sea is so far away from land in almost all cases, and if you want to go and study it, you have to get specialized equipment like UAVs, ROVs, etc. The actual amount of time you can spend on the bottom is very limited, surveys are extremely expensive, and the result is that any information from research tends to be little misconstrued snippets, which are distorting. Public understanding is minimal. And then when you add into that the last few decades of growing public mistrust in corporations, and particularly offshore events like the Deepwater Horizon blowout in Kondo, or even Fukushima, the results of a nuclear plant or the consequences of a nuclear plant being hit by a tidal wave, what you start to see is an industry that is unknown, where there's a visceral fear, and where there's a conflation of risks from other industries, which it doesn't really have. And then what you start to get is myths. Now, I want to start with two reasonably good sources here. These are recent articles that came out. On the top left, mining.com. If you thought my analogy to Hollywood was silly and over the top, then take a look at the picture that mining.com put at the top of their article. It literally is the set from the film Abyss. What is going on? That does not represent deep sea mining. The seabed there does not represent deep sea mining. This is insane. The Reuters article underneath it, okay, at least the harvester looks a little bit better, but there's a lovely octopus floating around. There's a ton of stuff on the seabed. It doesn't really represent exactly what's going on. It's very, very misleading. This lack of understanding, this inaccessibility, leads to myths. And those myths lead to the public really fundamentally not understanding what is going on. I love this comment that was posted at the bottom of this Reuters article. In your video, the protection of the seabed in corals is not obvious at all. Your animation shows the seabed as if it was only flat and made of sand only. This is not realistic. But the problem is, if you are in the Clarion-Clipperton zone, or if you are in the Cook Islands EEZ, and you are harvesting polymetallic nodules, and that's almost exactly what it looks like. It is realistic. The myths mean that the public misunderstand, the public trust is low, the conflation of risks is low, and what you get are significant repercussions. Significant repercussions from NGOs, significant pushback from the public. And I've heard privately that some of these repercussions are serious. It is not just Greenpeace, frankly, risking their own and the MV Coco's crew safety and lives around this protest. But I've heard of much worse overt and covert threats that are coming from this. And the real issue I have there is that if this industry is going to go ahead, then there needs to be a properly informed, educated debate that ensures that both sides are heard accurately and correctly. Otherwise, it is just distorting. These repercussions are a serious, serious issue. And from my side, what I find is the real challenge or sad thing here is that compared to deep water oil and gas, which is in many ways a terrible industry, the opportunity here is huge. Deep sea mining has the potential to provide metals that are crucial for the green transition. Rare earth metals for batteries, of course, but also for motors, for generators, for solar cells, etc. And many of these metals, have very limited supply. There are projected huge supply gaps, and deep sea mining has the potential to drive this green transition by providing them at potentially a low impact, a low cost, and in jurisdictions where you do not have human rights issues, you do not have the problems of, for example, cobalt mining in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and where the likely environmental impact is a fraction of that of terrestrial mining. And here's where we look at some of the fundamentals of deep sea mining, that because you have high ore grades, you have nodules with extremely high percentages of cobalt, manganese, lithium, copper, titanium, rare earths, etc. And because you have no overburden to remove, you potentially have far, far less waste, far, far less pollution, and potentially have a far, far lower impact on the world and ecosystems than other sources of mining. And as a capitalist, one of the things I love is that the fixed infrastructure that is required for a terrestrial mine is not there. You have a production support vessel which can mine a particular mine site and simply sail to the next site. It effectively recycles itself. And underlying this, you then have the unfortunate era that we are in, where we have significant geopolitical tensions, particularly with the war in Ukraine, with the war in Israel, and with tensions between major powers that have realized that the critical components they rely upon for their economy, for the main products they generate, and also, unfortunately, for their military, rely upon global supply chains, which often route via other countries, including their direct competitors. So you have an opportunity here to diffuse this huge geopolitical risk by critical metals or critical minerals from international waters, which is more secure and potentially more cost effective. So there's a huge opportunity here which warrants good informed debate. I do not believe that debate is happening because of the challenges of talking about it as an industry. So I would like to provide some answers. And I'm going to caveat this with, I am learning, and there are likely a number of mistakes in this. And I would very much welcome anyone that is willing to help me, to reach out to me, to provide more information for me, because I believe we need to answer these correctly in order for this to be a mature, potentially investable industry. Let's go back to these questions. Where will this happen? Who is involved? What will they do? Why do they occupy that role? How might the industry be structured? Well, let's talk about the where first. And really, and my apologies, by the way, I know that there's a mixture of very, very deep technical people in this audience. And I also know that there are audience members with say a lighter understanding, and I do not want to patronize or present anything that everyone already knows, but forgive me, let's just start with a few of the facts. Really fundamentally, we're talking about two different sets of jurisdictions when it comes to deep sea mining. We have international waters, and then we have the exclusive economic zones, of which at this point in time, we're really talking about the Cook Islands and Norway, though there's also Papua New Guinea, arguably it's also Sweden, and there's a number of other Pacific islands that potentially may grant licenses. International waters, contracts are issued by the International Seabed Authority, the ISA, under agreement from the UN, under UNCLOS, and the majority of that activity, about 60% of the activity, has been exploration contracts for polymetallic nodules in the Clarion-Clipperton zone. The ISA has issued 31 exploration contracts to date. It started in 2001, and it's issued contracts for everything from polymetallic nodules through to seabed massive sulfides, through to cobalt-rich crusts in a variety of different areas. As I said, mainly polymetallic nodules in CCZ, but prime crust zone, mid-ocean, mid-Indian Ocean ridge, etc. And there are many more opportunities for it to issue contracts. But a key point here that will be repeated is that these are all exploration contracts. They are not mining contracts. Now, when we talk about the EEZs, the exclusive economic zones, we're talking at this point really about the Cook Islands and Norway, and we're talking about national jurisdictions. We are talking about the exclusive economic zone, which is roughly crudely defined as about 200 nautical miles out to sea. There are some caveats, etc., around that one, but we're talking about a nation state issuing islands via either the Cook Islands Seabed Minerals Authority or proposal from Norway to issue licenses via the Norwegian Offshore Directorate. The Cook Islands has a large amount of polymetallic nodules, excellent grades, excellent abundances, and to date it has issued 3 exploration licenses. It issued those in 2022. And in Norway, we're talking about cobalt-rich crusts and seabed massive sulfides, and there's a proposal to begin issuing exploration licenses via the Norwegian Offshore Directorate. This used to be the Petroleum Directorate. It has now expanded its remit. And when we talk about who is doing this, it's very easy when you search for deep sea mining to think that there is only the metals company. We'll talk about search volumes in a little bit, but it's almost got to the point where, as Hoover is to vacuum cleaners, the metals company is to deep sea mining. And I think they are a wonderful company. They have some amazing people. They have a large amount of talent, etc. And I think that's great. But behind them, there are a whole host of industry participants. And they're doing a whole range of different things. I think this is also something the public is very much unaware of. And I can understand many of these participants not wanting to put their head up above the parapet and potentially get shot by an NGO for saying that they're doing this. But I also think it really undermines the industry if the perception is it is just the metals company, and maybe it's the metals company and Allseas, because there's a lot more interest. And there's definitely a lot more companies beyond this who are interested and intrigued and want to understand what is happening here, because they see a large potential to transfer their technology expertise, etc., into this industry if it picks up. But it does no one any benefit for us to all think it's just the metals company and Allseas. But these various participants are organizing and structuring themselves in really rather interesting ways. And two caveats here. This is a business ecosystem diagram. I'm saying that because it's so bloody complicated, I don't know if you can actually tell what is going on. And the second caveat is that this is a definite draft work in progress. And what I've tried to do here, and I've provided again on deepseaminer.ac, is to map out what each player roughly does within this industry. And the reason this is critically important is that if you have, for example, a thesis around wanting to invest in oil, you are a fund, a private equity fund, and you are ignoring climate change and you want to invest in oil stocks, then you have a plethora of different options to invest in oil, everything from buying oil as a commodity through to an exchange traded fund, through to buying directly into an oil company like Shell, or a drilling contract like Transocean, or into a services company like Schlumberger or Halliburton. And they all do different things and they all have different risk profiles, and there are a variety of options. But if you are sat looking at the deep sea mining industry and you have $2 million that you want to invest, it is not obvious what anyone does and where they're going to and why. But what I've started to see, and again, please, this is a draft, give me feedback on this, is that fundamentally the core of the industry seems to be rotating a lot around the license holders. Those license holders, like the metals company, GSR, etc., are contracting production support vessels from a couple of players. They are bringing in specialist contractors. They are bringing in specialist services. And from this regard, this part of the industry starts to look very much like the deep water oil and gas industry. And that if you want to think about how it might evolve, then the likes of the metals company, Moana, OML, Luki, etc., look something like an oil and gas major like Shell or BP or Exxon. They have the license, they're a project manager, they bring together various contractors, and they are trying to optimize production of nodules, etc. And then similarly, you have a series of production support vessel contractors like Transocean or Allseas, and they look like, frankly, rig companies. They look like Transocean, they look like Seadrill, they look like the sort of companies that own drill ships, and Shell comes along. And that is a very, very different business. It's a very different return. It's a very different risk profile. And then finally, you have a lot of specialist contractors who look somewhat like Schlumberger and Halliburton. The specialist contractors like harvesters, surveys, etc. And Schlumberger and Halliburton have built some massively valuable and very, very intriguing technologies in the oil and gas industry. And I believe there's the opportunity here. But the industry doesn't entirely look like the oil and gas industry. It also starts to look rather like the mining industry, because nodules are not oil or gas. Thank goodness. When it comes to climate change, thank God they are not. But they are a different beast. And so what you start to get is something that looks rather more like the mining industry. And I need to add a further caveat that I don't really understand the mining industry anywhere near as well as I could do or should do, and I would love anyone's input on this one. But what you start to find is that the nodules would be shipped to a processing facility, to a refining facility, and unlike oil, which tends to go through pretty much the same variations of a refinery, the actual opportunities to process and refine are myriad for nodules. But those flow sheets and understanding need to be understood in order to figure out the economics of any project, in order to raise financing. And this then adds nuance to this industry. Because suddenly what you have, if you're looking to invest in it, is an industry that from one perspective looks rather like mining. It looks like you have a resource that you are proving up to proven reserves, etc., that you can value, and then you process in some standard way, except that you can't process it in standard ways. There's work that is required, there's deep technical work that's required around processing, refining, etc. And therefore you can't quite value it like, for example, a cobalt play in the middle of Chile. But there's also this offshore operations aspect that looks rather like oil and gas. There's similar complexities in operating to that. And there's a number of operators like Transocean that are coming from the oil and gas industry. And this then causes a problem, because if you are a financial professional and you are intrigued by this and you decide that this is going to go ahead, the question is, what bucket does this fall into? Is it oil and gas? Is it offshore? Is it mining? Is it in fact deep tech? Is it in fact a complete technology play? Or is it in fact really just a bit of an extension of the current boom in rare earths and critical metals refining and investment that we're seeing in the US currently, and in fact it's just a bit of an extension of that. This makes it really rather tricky to explain and therefore to pitch to investors in order to get funding. This is a work in progress, and I really welcome any feedback from anyone that wants to add to this. But I do also want to provide some other facts, and I hesitated. I so desperately wanted to call these alternative facts because I come from tech. And there's another aspect to this one, which is, well, what does my background as a tech entrepreneur bring in? And I'm just going to spend 2 more minutes. I realize we're starting to run over time, or run over in terms of time. I'm going to spend 2 more minutes talking about some of the things the tech background actually brings in when you start to look at things like Google searches. And as I'm sure, not surprising to many of you, public interest in deep sea mining has grown rapidly. Search volumes from Google search data, and I will speak about this in a moment, I encourage you to go to Google Trends, are about 8 times up since 2010. Now we're going to dig into that a little bit, and it's just important to understand that, first of all, this is publicly available data. Please go to the link below, go to trends.google.com, play around with it. But it's also not entirely transparent how Google gets this data. And I just want to caveat it with, you might need to take this with a little bit of a pinch of salt. And particularly it's things like the topic is deep sea mining. And what topic means is that there are a lot of similar words to that. For example, deep sea mining in Norwegian. But there's also synonyms like subsea mining that grouped into this. So when I say search volumes of deep sea mining are up, what I mean is Google thinks that things that are related to deep sea mining, whether they're directly that, or whether they are subjects like deep sea mining moratorium, or whether they are synonyms in different languages, etc., all grouped in this. And the volumes are normalized by search volume. So things like population's grown, internet usage is up, It's all been normalized by that. So interest is probably up 8 times since 2010 in this area. What gets really interesting is that when you dig into what exactly the public is searching for, it's quite intriguing. And again, this is now information from a website called answerthepublic.com. Answer the Public relies upon Google Trends data. And so please take this with a pinch of salt. There's an extra degree of opaqueness in this. But again, you can sign up for answerthepublic.com, you can put in deep sea mining, you can put in whatever on earth you want, and you can see what the public are searching for. And within this topic of deep sea mining, it actually gets even more interesting because the vast majority of searches around this topic of deep sea mining are literally just deep sea mining or subsea minerals. But then the next largest category, with about 13% of search, is deep sea mining companies. And then it's things like stocks and invest. And the first time in which environmental impacts and any of that fury, those repercussions, those very, very, how can I put it, provocative articles really start to kick in is around 2.4% of searches being for deep sea mining environmental impacts, 1.7 being for deep sea mining pros and cons. And as I said, this is based upon Google's understanding of synonyms as well. Just for reference, Dead Sea Minerals hand cream is grouped into this because Google's algorithm thinks it's synonymous. And that's double the volume of searches from the public that deep sea mining moratorium has, which is, frankly, I find kind of crazy. Now, I'm sure you're sat there going, well, Philip, deep sea mining companies is like one search term and deep sea mining invest is one, but there's many, many different ways to say deep sea mining challenges, deep sea mining issues, deep sea mining moratorium, etc. But even when you group by those subjects, what you start to see is that the public is far, far more interested in deep sea mining companies and investing than it is in moratorium and pros and cons, etc. And I have some direct information on that because I have tried to cover as many articles and areas about deep sea mining on my deepseamining.ac website as possible. I believe I've covered a number of different areas, and frustratingly, what I find is that the vast majority of people coming to my website from Google search come to it because of interest in stocks and invest. It far outweighs anything. It far outweighs even the equipment. It definitely outweighs articles on things like the CCZ versus Norwegian EZ. It way outweighs anything around moratoria, pros and cons, etc. And in fact, the environmental component was such a small amount of search volume of people coming to my site that I had to group it into science. And the really, really depressing part, because the particular page took 5 minutes to build versus some of the pages that are frankly, really beautiful visualizations of data that help you understand, for example, what is going on in the Cook Islands or the amount of minerals or anything. The vast majority of people that come to deepseamining.ac go to /stocks and they look at a ticker that I copy pasted in that shows the metal company's stock price. And I think that says a lot about this industry, because I think what we have is a massively exciting and rapidly evolving industry, which has this huge potential. There is an enormous debate that is required. There is a lot of understanding. There is a lot more science. There is a lot more understanding of the environmental impacts, etc., that needs to occur. But that is stymied by the fact that a lot of the information is very inaccessible, and that you have extremely vocal parties that have very strong responses and serious repercussions that really, I believe, have caused the industry to become quite unwilling to communicate. And that unwillingness to communicate means that somebody like me coming in as an entrepreneur wanting to understand what I can do starts to really struggle to understand it. And finance professionals, investors who may want to invest in this really, really struggle to invest, and you end up with serious problems and serious challenges around getting investment in deep sea mining companies for them to continue the environmental assessments, the work, the surveys, the understanding required to understand if this should go ahead or not. Insufficient, usable, accessible information complicates the financial investment decision process or decision-making process. And I'm sat here speaking because what I believe the industry needs to do and what my website is trying to do is to provide some degree of information analysis that can be used by business and finance professionals who are interested and intrigued by this industry. Because if they don't have that information, they're going to simply walk away. And I would really, really appreciate any feedback, any input, any insights, or any help that I can have with this. Because as an industry, I know that funding and fundraising is extremely difficult. And it is very, very difficult if an analyst or an associate at midnight is banging their head against the wall and goes back to their investment partners saying, you know what, all I hear is controversy. I don't think this is investable, because I believe this industry can change the world, and I believe it should do. Thank you. I'll hand it over to Alex for questions.
Hey, Philip, that was awesome. Thank you so much. As we move into the Q&A section, we encourage everyone to participate by submitting questions through the chat box, and we aim to address each of your questions. And where I notice similar themes, I'll integrate them to deliver a more detailed response. So yeah, now's a great time, guys. If you can add your questions to us in the chat box, that'd be great. Philip, we appreciate you joining us here today for this Q&A session. Let's dive in with a couple of my questions for you. As well as having a very impressive background in creating and developing startups, you've also done a ton of amazing work in offshore drilling operations that I know our readership has a massive respect for. Are there specific challenges or opportunities in deep sea mining that you foresee as being similar to those in offshore drilling?
Yeah, I unfortunately was working in the oil and gas industry when Deepwater Horizon and Macondo occurred. And I want to stress two things. I think the first is that the risk profile of deep sea mining when it comes to extreme events like that is completely different. As I said, I think the public conflates the risks of this industry with those of explosions, of oil spills, with other industries where that risk really doesn't exist. We are not talking about high pressure hydrocarbons. We're not talking about oil and gas. We're not talking about fluids that can spill and can wash up on coasts, etc. We're talking about metal nodules which are being lifted by the flow of water. However, and this is a very, very important thing for me, about 3 months into my career at the start, one of my friends was really badly hurt lifting the umbilical cable for an ROV. 13-ton cable being lifted in the wind offshore. They did something stupid. They put their hand up to try and stop it swinging in the wind, and the umbilical drum cut their hand in half. And I have this vision of my friend running up 2 flights of stairs, just not screaming, just with blood pouring out of the hand, frankly, quiet, and then running back down and just going, oh. And that is really, really important to me, because when you start looking at the actual risks, and particularly the risks to health that lead to the social license to operate, the risks in deep sea mining and the offshore operations are very, very similar to a deep water drill ship, because it's things like slips, trips, falls, heavy lifts, heavy equipment, and helicopter operations that unfortunately in the oil and gas industry cause the vast majority of injuries. And unfortunately, I believe it's going to be the same in the deep sea mining industry. And so whilst I have to stress that the outsize or the sort of white swan events in deep sea mining are completely different in terms of their risk profile to oil and gas. You simply do not have the risk of a Macondo Deepwater Horizon type blowout. Nonetheless, the actual practical operating risks are pretty similar. And if you get someone hurt or killed, it very rapidly erodes your social license to operate, because The question is whether you can operate safely and effectively.
Right, that's such a heavy story. That's so tough. But yeah, like boats in the offshore region is definitely it's a dangerous area to work, right? And we see that in the salaries for offshore workers as well. They're typically elevated compared to land work. But that's so tough. It can be a very dangerous place, especially when the ocean's rough and it's pretty scary being out there, right, in some of those waves and conditions.
I think the other part to add to that, though, is that most of the oil and gas industry, or most oil and gas, offshore oil and gas operations are within about 100 to 120 nautical miles of the coast. It's the nature of where you find hydrocarbons. And therefore, they're typically within about a 1 hour's helicopter flight. You'll know this flying up to the Shetland Islands to go out to North Sea drilling platforms. Typically, it's about an hour's flight, so you can get somebody back if something happens. The Clarion Clipperton zone, by contrast, is completely different. We're talking about a 3 to 4 day sail. The Cook Islands are slightly better, but we're still talking about quite significant distances from the islands, and then the islands themselves have really quite limited, particularly medical facilities. And so I think there's also another component of the industry that needs to come in, which is to understand that risk exists, and it is quite an extreme risk when compared. Extreme is wrong, forgive me. It is quite a different operational risk than just offshore oil and gas because of the distances involved and because of the infrastructure or the relative lack thereof in some of these locations.
Yeah. And we're very good at operating in these kind of environments, right? Like it's been, I guess, going back to your talk, there's a lot of crossover from other industries, like, and that expertise will be brought into the deep sea mining industry.
Agreed. And again, this is part of the reason why, I'm just going to jump back to it. It's part of the reason why I find this slide or this image so intriguing. Because there is a lot of expertise that can be brought into this. There are a number of players, a number of companies, a number of technologies that can be copied across. But if the understanding of this industry is that it's just the metals company in Allseas sort of doing something, then business development is really quite difficult. So you say, well, where do I go to? What is the best joint venture that I can do? If I have for example, this is a great example, remote or automated surveying. From the oil and gas industry, there's a number of companies that have how can I put it, sort of AI-powered ROVs that go and survey pipelines and subsea structures, etc. That is perfect technology to bring across to reduce the cost of doing surveys for deep sea mining. When you look at the costs that are involved if you are a license holder in terms of the scientific baseline surveys, etc., and the amount of time it takes to do something like box core surveys, if that could be automated or speeded up, then that is the point in time at which a license holder is most struggling for money. The actual expense is significant. To do the scientific work, the baseline surveys, etc., you might be talking about 100 to 200 million before you've got something, before you have a proven reserve, and therefore before you have the ability to raise money. So anything that can come in and increase efficiency, reduce cost, reduce offshore surveying costs at that early stage is amazing. But it's
Right.
not clear, I don't think, for some of these contractors how they can apply their technology.
Right. So I guess that's a nice segue into my next question. And I'm aware of the time we're gonna have to um, be a little bit short in our answers here. So how feasible is it to develop startup companies in such a rapidly evolving space as the deep sea mining industry? And as a serial entrepreneur yourself, what opportunities do you see in this space?
I mean, I have two very strong, distinct feelings about this industry. The first is that it's always amazing to find an industry that is rapidly expanding and growing like this. But on the other hand, it is so capital intensive because of the cost of operating offshore, because of the amount of equipment that's involved, that I also see significant challenges. And to be quite honest with you, I'm sat here presenting like this today because I don't know exactly where I want or should be fitting into this industry. It's not clear to me. But what I do strongly believe is that over the next few years, we are going to see hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars flowing into this industry as it matures, as we understand the environmental impacts, as those critical metal demands ramp up, etc. I just believe there's a vast amount of opportunities. And frankly, what you see in front of you is what I'm working on is the opportunity to help guide and consult on that flow of money from the finance industry to the best and the right opportunities within deep sea mining, and to do things like consulting, diligence, etc. So I think it's very difficult because of the money, or because of the volumes of money required, but I just think there's a huge opportunity that's about to explode here.
Big opportunity, right? That's cool. So there was a comment that came in from Cretan, I think it's his name, about you talks about the movies and how the portrayal of operations on the seafloor and various things on the seafloor have historically had, you know, this real negative connotation. We envisage monsters and stuff on the seafloor, right? And so apparently there's a recent movie, Meg 2. I haven't seen it yet. It's on Netflix. I guess I'm gonna have to go and check this out.
Yes.
That paints deep sea mining in the villain role.
Sorry, I'm going to go on a tangent. I'm a tech entrepreneur, and I've been playing around with ChatGPT,
Okay.
so OpenAI, generative image generation. And I said, please generate an image of a future in which deep sea mining has gone horribly, horribly, horribly wrong. And I kept saying, more wrong, and you get this. This is literally an image that was generated with, I don't know what, like dinosaurs with laser eyes and monsters and things. And yes, you know, the Meg 2 is about deep sea mining gone wrong, and this prehistoric, I've not seen it by the way, but this prehistoric megalodon apparently surfaces from these deep depths. It's insane. Yes, yeah. Public conception of deep sea mining is really being shaped by, frankly, Hollywood and misconceptions. I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch the question in there. I was too busy getting
It was
excited.
more of a comment. Yeah, it was more of a comment. And just to be clear, this is not any kind of real representation, right? Like laser dinosaurs with laser beams. Oh my goodness, that's wild.
It's insane, but yeah, the cultural zeitgeist is such that at least generative AI thinks that is a risk, and you say, well, where the hell is that coming from? And you go, Hollywood.
Yeah, right. Okay, here's a question from Julie. Assume that the interest is in manganese and nodule minings, but are there other products that are being explored for and developed? So I guess it's about the different elements out there, and
Yeah,
she's
I've got to caveat this with I am not a strong metallurgist, as I've been realizing when I've been diving into the various flow sheets and the various processes, etc. My understanding is that there are a wide range of different options, and so the fundamental thing is that the formation, at least, of polymetallic nodules is all about that many of the minerals that are washed into the oceans through things like weathering or plants and animals, etc., simply dying, decaying, sit in suspension. They don't dissolve and eventually precipitate out onto things like surfaces on seamounts and hence cobalt-rich crusts, or onto, under certain circumstances, solid materials like shark's teeth, and you get polymetallic nodules. And so what you get is this vast range of different metals that are precipitating out, and you get almost everything. If you let's caveat that. If you read particularly things like James Hines' report with the US Geological, or the USGS, the list of metals that are present in nodules at high abundances, or reasonable abundances, is mind-blowing and stupendous. I can't speak much beyond the use of manganese, etc. Of course, cobalt, lithium, copper in particular, all have major roles in electronics, batteries, cars, etc. But then the rare earth elements, things like neodymium, neodymium, my apologies, are required for things like magnets in electric motors and generators, and then you get a whole host of different rare earth elements that are used for example, semiconductors for doping. I can't speak well as a metallurgist, and I cannot speak about the whole plethora of different usages there, but the opportunity is well beyond manganese. There are a range of different metals that are present, and as I understand it, speaking as a not that great metallurgist, the opportunities to process and refine and extract those, particularly around the rare earth elements, are being researched. I cannot say any more than that with any particular confidence.
That's
Does that
great.
vaguely answer the question?
Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, it's there's so many there's so many different elements involved in this, and I think that you're totally right. There's going to be different, maybe different companies will go after different things, but then in the processing side of things, that's where the different parts, different elements will be extracted from whatever products are being recovered. So it's a it's an
And I think that's
exciting
where
space.
that sorry, Alex, go for it.
Yeah, no, it's an exciting space, and there's a lot of different things that can be recovered from the seafloor, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have a couple of questions about regulations, and I just want to preface this with a mention to a webinar that we had previously with Catherine Rees-Thomas. So she discussed the regulations in detail, and that's kind of her subject area. So if you're interested in regulations specifically, that would be a great webinar to check out, and you can access that through the Marine Technology Society. But I guess maybe you could post a comment here, Philip, on regulations and kind of what's going on right now. I know there's a lot of changes that have happened. There's a couple of comments are talking about specific things that have happened.
Yes.
But just maybe you could comment on the broad kind of regulatory environment.
Absolutely. And I just want to caveat that the regulatory environment is not my area of specialty. But what I can speak to is that as the finance industry looks to this, the regulations seem to create a lot of confusion and misunderstanding. And I think the first thing to say is that a finance professional looking at this industry really is looking for strong regulation and also strong internal guidance regulations, industry bodies, frankly, because when you look at other similar mature industries, the maturity is expressed in the fact that there are regulatory bodies, there are industry bodies, there are working groups, etc., and that the industry has evolved and has formed what it needs to form and produce in order to be effective. And a lot of that is sort of somewhat missing in the deep sea mining industry. But just to add to that, I think the complexity of particularly the ISA and their failure to come up with clear route forwards in terms of mining licenses has spooked a lot of finance professionals. It's quite unclear what exactly, let's rephrase that. I believe that most finance people find it quite unclear what exactly that means. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around, well, does this mean that mining licenses will never or can never be issued? Does it mean that something strange is going to happen? And that misunderstanding or that lack of understanding, lack of clarity, then rolls into uncertainty, which rolls into risk. And with risk comes the inability to form a clear or a good investment thesis, or you get an investment thesis in which the valuation is extremely low because you simply have to factor in X amount or X percentage likelihood that, in your opinion, the regulations never come in or they come in 5 years' time, and therefore it simply scuppers everything. So I can't really talk about regulations. Please just caveat it with that. But what I can say is that the lack of clarity around regulations and the gaps around the internal industry bodies do mean that I find a lot of finance and investors don't see this as a mature it would never be mature, but don't see this as even a sort of nascently maturing industry, which is challenging.
Yeah. Okay, I understand. I'm aware you got to take off in a minute. So let's go for one more quick question. There's a question here about the offshore wind industry and how this diagram that's on the screen now would kind of relate to it.
That is a fascinating question, which I absolutely cannot answer. But whoever it is, please contact me. I would love to dive into that area. I'm sorry, I simply don't know, and I would be lying if I made any further comment than that.
Yeah, the offshore wind industry requires a lot of metals, right? So I'm pretty sure that some of these, at least some of the metals that would come back from operations would likely be used to create some of the parts for wind energy.
My understanding is that, again, I'm speaking very much out of place here because I really don't know enough about this, but speaking as an engineer, things like particularly the effectiveness of the generators for wind turbines and whether they are fixed magnets, etc., makes a huge difference. And of course, just really, really simple things like copper. Large amounts of copper are required because you need it for the transmission cables, you need it for the transformers, you need it for the windings of the generator. The amount of metal that is required for the green transition in terms of solar, batteries, wind turbines, etc., is significant and huge. And I have an article on that at deepseamining.ac, which I will not attempt to pull up at this point in time, but it goes into the various metals that are required for various components of the green energy transition.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm aware of the time now, and I want to respect your time here. So I don't want to run over too much. We're a couple of minutes late already. And I want to thank everyone for their questions. And if you guys, if you have questions that we haven't addressed today, please go check out Philip's website, deepseamining.ac, and you can reach him there. And so you can open those discussions, and I'm sure he'd love to speak to you all. So we're going to conclude today's wonderful webinar, and we want to extend our heartfelt appreciation to each and every one of you for your participation and for all the great questions. A special thank you to the Marine Technology Society for their support, and I'm also confident you'll all join me in thanking our speaker today. Thank you, Philip.
Thank you all. It's been an absolute pleasure. As I say, I see an industry here with enormous potential that can really power the green energy transition at potentially low impact and low cost, and I am extremely excited about it. Please reach out to me. I would love to collaborate with any and all of the companies that are involved or want to become involved in this, because I see a huge opportunity for all of us. And thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. You're very welcome. Yeah. So to stay up to date with the webinar series, please be sure to follow both the Marine Technology Society and the Marine Mineral Resources Committee on LinkedIn. Go there right now, smash the follow button on the page, and that way you won't miss out. We look forward to seeing you at the next Marine Technology Society Marine Mineral Resources webinar. Much aloha. Bye.